All right. Welcome to Volterra Podcast number 12. We are on an even dozen. Louis, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel pretty special, Rowan. It makes me feel great inside, actually.
The Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen. I'm here
Yeah.
with, as always, with Louis Reeve and Ben Schreckinger. How are we doing today, guys?
Good.
Good.
Doing grand, yeah, as things go.
Yeah. We were just talking and little pre-show, and there's nothing really going on in the world right now to speak of.
At the same time, there's a lot of shit going on in the world right now.
Exactly.
More than
So there's all these stories out there that are kind of these extended problems, but the media isn't really covering them to any degree anymore. We've kind of fallen back onto, what was it, Louis? A British guy got killed, a couple of British people got killed in Thailand or Myanmar?
Yeah, it's kind of like an annual incident where a British tourist get murdered on the Southeast Asia Trail, I think they call it now, which is the sort of post-university, sometimes during university, if you've got the capital to do it, trek through former French Indochina and various parts of former British India, where you go around and well, as far as I can figure out, you get stoned with a lot of Swedish people and have a really spiritual time. But anyway, on a more serious note, this there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like, don't let me sort of sound condescending. I never had the cash to do it. I probably will at some point and go out and get stoned with loads of spiritual Swedish guys, and that'll be grand. But yeah, they sort of a Burmese guy got caught after sort of brutally hacking up two British tourists with a garden hoe. I assume it's the same translation in America, like one of those things to remove weeds from between paving stones. And so that's quite a big deal here because loads of kids go out there and they get really drunk and stoned and then get killed by former peoples that we used to which we've colonized in the past. So
yeah.
Was there a motive?
Sorry, say that again?
Was there a motive?
I don't know what's happened at the moment. The last thing I saw, the Thai police were sort of parading him through the streets in a sort of feudal and medieval style, like, we got him. I'm not sure exactly what the motive has been yet, and whether we'll get anything coherent about it is up to the Thai justice system, which I hear is sometimes slightly backward in its judgments of these kind of things.
So Ben, you spent time in where did you go? Burma?
I did spend one night in Bangkok, but didn't make it very far from the airport. And then I spent 3 weeks last summer in Burma.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So this guy is Burmese, right? The guy that hacks up the.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are a lot of like sort of undocumented migrant Burmese workers in Thailand, and they have a bad law. They're sort of abused by the Thai economy and the Thai government.
Okay. So there's a bit of as usual, it's not just some guy killed somebody else. There's underlying social grievances, I would imagine.
Or this
guy could just be out of his mind.
Or walked in on these British guys fucking his wife. Who knows what happened?
Yeah, exactly. And we probably we'll never know. But the point is that while there's protests in Hong Kong, Ukraine is starting to fight again. The UN is meeting last week and over the summer and over the weekend. Benghazi.
Furious.
Fast and Furious. The point is there are these stories that are out there, but there's no extended coverage in the media to speak of. Now, Ben, as our resident journalist, do you want to take a whack at that?
I'm just not convinced that there's no. I'm gonna navigate to the New York Times homepage right now and see what they've got on it and this is the U.S. edition. So we've got new employment numbers. We've got an editorial about ISIS. The lead story is about Hong Kong.
Okay. All right. And ISIS, you completely forgot about ISIS. ISIS is still there, isn't going anywhere, which is what I said in my piece a few weeks ago, that the longer they stay, the more substantial or the more legitimate they'll become. And people are, and here's the other thing, people are actually starting to call them the Islamic State now, rather than ISIS or ISIL. They just give it the caveat of the so-called Islamic State.
Which is ironic because, well, you're calling it the Islamic State. You know, like
Exactly.
You don't really need that modifier.
Yeah.
There's a story. It's not really directly about the Ukraine situation, but it's about Khodorkovsky, sort of his mounting challenge to Putinism. So, and television news may be very different, but the New York Times is my homepage, and I think that they don't really drop stories. I think if people stop paying attention.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't think that criticism is always fair, at least when you're painting with like a very broad brush. Because I think the Times is on top of most of the stories that we mentioned.
Yeah. So you're a partisan of the old gray lady.
Yeah, I'd say I'm a defender of the Times. I think they have the best news report of any organization out there. Maybe BBC World Service. BBC World Service, I think, probably casts a wider, more thorough net globally, but the Times, I think, probably beats it for like analysis and investigation and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. But what do you think the readership of the New York Times is?
The size or like the profile?
The size.
I believe it's the most read news site in English, but let's look this up. This would be useful to.
It's a leading question because it's false nostalgia for sure, because I wasn't alive to begin with when this was happening. But I'm thinking back on the old like nightly news media. You know what I mean? That would cover a story. I'm talking like Edward R. Murrow, who covered Senator McCarthy for weeks on end until he was completely discounted.
Sure, but you know, Willie Rauschbaum, who was at the New York Post, is now at the New York Times, has, with his reporting in the past several years, taken down 2 governors. He took down, uncovered that Spitzer was client number 9. Yeah. Spitzer's gone. You know, his reporting uncovered the Troopergate where Patterson appears to have like used his state troopers to like quash an investigation to an aide beating his girlfriend, and then Patterson was out the door. So I think some of it really may be nostalgia. Like there still are huge takedown investigations.
Yeah, but again, you're only citing the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean sure, but again, you're citing a system in which there were 3 broadcasting networks, you know, and like 60 Minutes still airs huge investigations
about Benghazi.
I think that while it is true that in the United States, like these second-tier newspapers that were very strong, these metropolitan newspapers across the country that were doing, you know, New York Times level investigations and getting results for, you know, maybe at least 30 years, have really withered, and that is a problem. It's just like I would argue on behalf of like just being a little like more precise about defining where the problem is and not letting your idea of the problem sort of metastasize into like media used to be so great and now it's so shitty, you know?
Yeah. No, I wasn't saying that. I was just saying that that stories are often left on the back burner too quickly.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that once they stop generating buzz, and the media sort of follows the buzz rather than leading in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And I think all of these criticisms are just much more true again for like television news, right, which is something I'm much less tuned into, but I think is probably is more symptomatic of these problems that you're talking about.
The only time I watch CNN is when there's a speech on or something like that. Like that's the only time I turn any of this stuff on. So Louis, what do you go to? What's your go-to for Ripley? Not now. What's your go-to for news media? Are you just on the Beeb, or are you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got to be honest. I'm not quite in as deep as you guys are in terms of my coverage of regular current events.
So from the outside, from the outside of someone who doesn't follow the news so closely, what's I don't know. What's your take?
Previously, is that a dog, by the way? That is a dog.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not just going crazy. I had quite a late night last night, so I just wondered if I'd finally cracked, but no, that's that's grand. I used to be always on the BBC. I still do. I still do go to the BBC, and I always kind of trusted the BBC on everything you do, because basically in Britain that's all we have. We have BBC. There's like Channel 4 News and ITV. ITV's absolutely right off. That's just rubbish. And Channel 4 is quite annoying because it has commercial breaks. So BBC is great. It was great. And I kind of was totally fine with it until the whole build up to the Scottish referendum, actually, where they completely took the side of the UK government, which, to be fair, they're paid by, and that's where the money comes from, so with due reason. But in terms of like impartiality in newscasting, it was, fucking well off. Like, they were not doing anything. They were just demonizing one side, and it was just, it got a bit partisan. And since then, I've kind of taken it all a bit with a pinch of salt, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. I've seen a couple stories on the BBC that are definitely swayed in the British kind of neoliberal, Americanized, Atlantic take on things. Like, I'm forgetting the specific story, but it was about it was something in the Middle East, or something about it might have been Russia. It might have been about Russia, and it was just, there was no kind of, it was very much reported from a British perspective. From a British political perspective, which I guess is kind of not saying a lot, but yeah.
No, it's pretty rubbish, because British people, our political perspective is a bit weird and very, very, very jaded. We still can't get out of our head that we're no longer like the big player on the world scene, and we tend to report like that. So this, come on, we're an empire, I'll take you all on, and it gets a bit sort of.
The Grenadines or something.
About the BBC, I think, is that in the States, overseas, we have Voice of America, which is basically propaganda, more or less, produced by the American government that we broadcast to foreign countries, especially sort of enemies of the States, like not democratic regimes.
Radio Free Europe, right? That's one of them.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether or not that still exists.
It does.
Something is very much in that vein. And the BBC is the same thing overseas in these countries. In Burma, you had BBC and you had Voice of America, and they were sort of considered like more or less the same thing. This like Western propaganda that like for certain things could be more trusted than the government, for certain things from the people I was talking to, including journalists, could be less trusted than government news sources, depending on the topic and the specific story. But they were both sort of considered to have like really deep inherent biases. And in the States, we don't have like a Voice of America at home. We have NPR, and I think NPR is like a very excellent news station. So I'm wondering if sort of like if there's like a weird brand thing here where this is all under in Great Britain, it's all under the umbrella of the BBC. So like, are they sort of conceding implicitly that BBC at home is also has like is towing a political line for the British state? I don't know.
I think that's the case. I mean, it's not to the extent, and this brings up another kind of issue, but the fact that Russian media, what Russian media has been reporting about Ukraine and what's going on there is the complete polar opposite of what the American media has, and the American media is viewing it through the lens of the American kind of worldview, and the Russian media is reporting it through the the lens of the Russian worldview. Now, the facts may support the American worldview, but that doesn't make the Russian worldview any less legitimate, at least as far as the actual facts go. Does that make sense?
I was talking to a Lithuanian girl in New York. This would now be 2 weekends ago, and she has been in Maine all summer. She's from Lithuania, an EU country, though her parents, I think she's ethnically Russian. I think Russian is spoken at home. She was sort of saying that, yeah, she didn't trust American media, and she doesn't know who downed that flight. She thinks it might have been the Americans. Ron Paul says that he believes that the Russians didn't down the Malaysian flight over Ukraine. And it's sort of taken for granted in much of the world that the CIA controls a lot of shit. It's once you get out of the United States, there is just a different presumption about the American government's involvement in world events. It's an interesting perspective to consider.
Yeah. So that brings up another Ripley. Not now. Go play. So that brings up another thing we were talking about before in our pre-show about conspiracy theories and the idea that in some circles, a lot of conspiracy theories are taken as take that up, take that conversation up.
Sure. Conspiracy theories. You have this sort of presumption when you hear that when it comes up that these sort of fringe beliefs that wackos and nutjobs hold. But to just take one example in the States, 3/4 of Americans do not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing John F. Kennedy. And that is the government line. That is the conclusion of the Warren Report. Although the conclusion of the Warren Report is sort of undermined by the fact that they had their declassified conclusion, and then they had their classified conclusion, which won't be released until 2020 something or 2030, which is so maybe 3/4 of Americans have a very good reason to be like, well, let's at least see what the real Warren Report says 80 years later. So yeah, it's something to contend with. It's we were talking about this because I got an assignment from a magazine to profile an investigative journalist who's worked for a lot of mainstream outlets, who now has his own news outlet that's sort of a conspiracy theory clearinghouse almost. And he believes that the Boston Marathon bombing was an FBI black flag operation. And it's easy to not engage with something like that, but I think that given the fact that so many Americans, if you look at the polling on how many Americans believe that 9/11 was a government conspiracy, it's an astounding percentage. That you at least, I think that, and they are always part of the gripe of conspiracy theorists is that mainstream media doesn't engage and ignores and sweeps under the rug. So I think it sort of does behoove the mainstream media, just given the number of people who believe in some of these theories, to engage with them and take them seriously, and take a look at the evidence and refute or accept the theory at least.
To some extent, that's what they've been doing with Benghazi. No, I mean the Benghazi. It's just kind of they thought there was a story there. They looked for the story. Everybody looked for the story. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but over time, it came out that there was clearly no story there.
What's interesting with Benghazi, and at least the Times coverage of it, is that there were all these, on the right, all the complaints for the mainstream media sweeping this under the rug, they're not covering this. And the Times got enough complaints that the New York Times public editor, the ombudswoman, Margaret Sullivan, reviewed the Times coverage, and she actually did conclude that the Times was covering the story only through the lens of Republicans waving the bloody flag on Benghazi. Yeah. And he said that in looking at the Times coverage, they should have been doing more substantive investigation of Benghazi, that there were legitimate issues here that the Times wasn't fully addressing. So there are sometimes if you trust Margaret Sullivan, who's a pretty even-keeled, middle-of-the-road kind of person, there are times when the mainstream media isn't engaging enough with some of these suspicions.
Yeah, I want to make one point, and then I want to ask Louis if there's any British conspiracies. But that kind of brings us back to the point that the news media kind of puts things on the back burner and only talks about the news media's own coverage of these stories a lot. It's a kind of self-repeating process in a lot of ways. But Louis, does Britain have any conspiracies along the lines of JFK or I don't know, Bilderberg or any of that jazz?
If you want to go totally parochial, we still think Jack the Ripper was Edward VII, that kind of thing. That's a wee while back though. Now I don't think anyone's going to be really like digging that one out. There's the occasional king that's supposed to be gay. That's never like a particularly positive one to sweep under the rug. I'm just trying to think, because we don't really have quite the same tradition of killing our leaders, or maybe like they're sort of better protected, or we don't have good enough weapons. But we haven't, we certainly haven't had any kind of heads of state killed in the last 150. In fact, we've only ever had one. And he was legitimately just shot. There was nothing to it.
Who was that?
Ooh, good question. Robert Walpole, Prime Minister, 18. You'll have to look up the exact date, listeners, as my British history is limited in terms of political. Was it Robert Walpole? Andrew Walpole? I forget. He's the only head of state to ever been killed in Britain, except for sort of Viking times where the king went into battle with.
And Charles, one of the Charleses was.
Which are we talking? Charles, like Charles the First, or that was
beheaded?
Yeah, he was. That was really long ago though. There was again. That's so 1600s.
It was tripped. There was a guillotine there. Shouldn't have been there.
Yeah. CIA. I'm going to put it on paper right now. The CIA was involved in Charles II's death.
Charles the First.
Charles I.
I mean, speaking of political assassinations and conspiracy theories, the lead national story in the New York Times today, by the Times White House correspondent, is about how Black Americans are very suspicious of the shoddy Secret Service protection of the president, and many of them believe it's intentional. So it is right there. It's I was a little surprised to see that story. It's funny because, I haven't read the story. I hope Peter Baker references this. But if you go back to it's like 1996 or so, Chris Rock has this great stand-up special, classic stand-up special, and one of them is like, he was like, you can't have a black president. Someone's gonna kill the president. What you're never gonna see is a black vice president. Because then some black guy is just going to kill the president. He's going to go to jail. Everyone's going to love him.
But that's another interesting.
It's been deeply ingrained in Black American consciousness, this idea that, to the extent that, and in the 90s, I think this was he was also talking about the Colin Powell flirtation with the presidency. But to the extent that 20 years ago a black president was thinkable, the immediate next thought apparently was, but they'd think of a way to get rid of the guy. So it's.
And to be fair,
the shoddiness of the Secret Service in that.
They have gotten rid of him to a large degree. The Republican Party has completely. I mean, this is a whole other rant entirely.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
They've completely neutered him, and if he had been able to do some of the things, people would be more angry. Would be more violently angry about what is. But that's a whole other rant.
Yeah.
But that's the idea that there's different conspiracy theories for different racial groups and different social groups, I think is another interesting kind of point. Because there's so many things that the black community believes that the white community is just like, what the hell are they talking about? But they have a lot of credence to their suspicions.
Right. It's a worldview formed by living in a community that was actively being conspired against. Ta-Nehisi Coates has that reparations article about just sort of the ways that blacks were deprived of good housing through the late 20th century. that's my sort of theory, my working theory, and having dealt with like sources and contention stories where they sort of have come across sort of conspiratorial happenings, is that once you have that experience once of like really seeing a conspiracy and it's like valid, then you tend to see that everywhere else, even where it's not valid going forward.
Yeah, but I think the key is to get as close to the situation as possible. So, for instance, I live 3 miles from Sandy Hook, and I've been working in that community for the past 6 months or so, and there are conspiracy theorists that say Sandy Hook was faked or was a false flag, like the Boston bombing or whatever. I can say without any hesitation, that shit was real as fuck. Like I was talking to someone who was, I was talking to a teacher, one of the teachers, the 2nd grade teacher at Sandy Hook, who was in the school, told me and my boss her story of what happened in the school. It was one of the most like depressing, deflating, jaw-dropping experiences I've ever had. This woman was 2 doors to the right. The guy went left, and the first door on the left, she was 2 doors on the right. It's like you can't fake that kind of stuff. And there's a whole lot of people in the U.S., primarily gun nuts, that believe Sandy Hook was faked by the government to take away our guns, which is completely absurd.
I'm taking it Sandy Hook was one of the plethora of school shootings that goes on over there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one of that was like the worst one. Well, they're all terrible, obviously, but this one was 20 like first graders and six teachers.
Okay, first grade is young. Yeah, that's or is that the old?
First grade is like 6.
All right, really young. Right, got you. Okay.
Yeah, 6 to 7. So, yeah, really young. So do we want to wrap up our conspiracy talk or our media conspiracy talk? Louis, do you have any final thoughts on this?
I think like whenever there's like these situations of slight adversity, like people are going to search for some answer, and there is always answers to be found in the back of someone's mind. Put it that way. Even like, I mean, I refer again even to like the Scottish referendum. Like we lost, and people have been like signing petitions demanding recounts, like saying the English have done us again. Nah. Like whenever there's like a situation where a large amount of people are, unhappy or faced with a decision they didn't like, there's always going to be something, left field put out there.
Yeah. Benjamin?
No, this is helpful though in helping me think about this assignment going forward.
When is it? Who's it with? Can you disclose that information?
I think so. I hope so. Boston Magazine should be coming out in January.
You've done a couple pieces with them before, right?
Yeah. This month's cover story.
Nice.
About Chinese investors. So.
Well done.
Louis, have you been writing anything recently?
Yeah, a little bit here and there. A lot more stuff about work as I've been taking quite a lot of shifts.
At the haunted house?
No, the haunted house is a nostalgic story. That was a while ago. It's like a small section of the large sort of pastiche that is my like terrible employment record. The haunted house was a long time ago. It was like a summer and 2 weeks of the next summer job before I was sacked. But it was while I was still at uni, so it was a while ago. I'm actually about to be published in Australia, actually, which is quite weird. But for a piece that I wrote a while ago, it may have gone up on the Volterra as well, actually. So it's really transversing the English-speaking world. It was the piece about the tramp pissing his pants on the London Underground. It's quite a recent piece.
That was not.
No. Oh well, I'll certainly send it to you if you'd like. If any of the listeners would like to read about, this is a short piece about. I went to work the other day, and just to sum it up, I got on the London Underground, which at best times is a fairly unpleasant experience and is never actually very fun. though it does usually kind of get you there. Yeah, the tube. And as I got on to this like revolting carriage, stuffy kind of, it's like something is worse than normal. Something is definitely worse. And then I realized it was just this acrid stench of urine. So I spent the next kind of, I probably should have changed carriages, but I sort of stayed in the carriage to try and identify who the culprit was. And then,
as you do,
I saw him. And yeah, it's quite amazing. Like Londoners adverse, like they really will go through anything in order to get somewhere, like getting places. Maybe it's the same in New York. I don't know, but they will endure almost anything in order to just keep a fucking seat on an underground train. Like people blow these trains up sporadically. I guarantee that before that one of those trains ignited, this is controversial now, but like before one of those trains like ignited, someone was looking at that bag ticking away and being like, hey, I got a seat, man. Like, like, it's probably a cuckoo clock, and then bang, that's it. You're a statistic. But
Yeah.
hey, you're a sitting down statistic in like the rush hour, which is pretty grim here. Anyway, I sort of witnessed this tramp kind of piss his pants, and thought this is. I had my notebook actually with me, so I wrote it down at the time, just kind of like a account of the whole experience, and. Yeah, I sent it to a couple of magazines on the Literary Underground, which you might know or not. And this one in Australia got back to me and said they'd like to publish it. So that's cool. So yeah, the English-speaking world, we're slowly getting around.
Yeah.
What's
Well,
the literary underground?
Sorry, say again?
What's the literary underground?
As far as I can work out, the actual answer to that question, I don't really know, but it's maybe a collective of magazines of just a piece of literature, pieces of just coverage of stuff that they've kind of brought together, and I go on it because the stuff I write is quite sort of left field and quite gritty in times, and I just figured that would be quite a good. There's a lot of publications that are quite good platforms for the publication of stories about destitute people pissing and shitting themselves on public transport. But yeah, if you type them into Google, there's like a big list of all these magazines across the world that are all sort of part of this, I guess, movement maybe.
Cool.
It's quite interesting.
Now, Ben, have you written any? I think I've asked you this before. Have you written any like fiction or kind of narrative stuff outside journalism?
I wrote a piece one time that was like rejected a couple times, but that's it.
Yeah. No. I've started to dabble a little bit. I have a little bit of fiction that fiction, semi-fiction that I've started writing, but not like it's not ready for anything and none of it's finished. So I started one the other day about this. I was listening to NPR and they were talking about hell. And like how society's concept of hell has kind of changed over the centuries, and like what stayed the same about hell, and like 60% of the American population believes in hell. Believes that when you die, if you're not good, you go to hell.
If the devil didn't exist, we'd have to invent him.
Exactly. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist, right?
Yeah.
But my piece was.
Is that a quote from The Usual Suspects?
That is from The Unusual Suspects, yes. Yeah. But the piece I was listening to this and I don't know, inspired. I don't know what the word is, but I thought of this piece about this guy that goes to hell and realizes it's not that bad.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
And like it's like he's like in line. Like it's a really long. It starts with he like wakes up, but he like finds himself in a massive long line, but the line ends at some point. So it's like it would basically be like this kind of look into like how people see hell, but like there's good in everything is my kind of take. Like you can take good from anything. You can kind of like draw out pieces of positivity from any situation you're in. So that would be the goal of it. But I've written like 100 words of it. So
I like it. That's cool.
yeah. All right. Let's chat some football before we go, Lou.
Sure thing. Been a pretty depressing weekend. Well, like there was some very disappointing matches of football. Both derbies, wasn't it? It was the North London derby and the Merseyside derby also, both of which were 1-1 and not amazing games of football really. I guess neither side could really afford to lose, and it just kind of yeah. I watched the Arsenal game. It was a bit disappointing really. Though on the plus side, Yunus Kabul was really good. So
yeah, apparently he's been listening to our podcast and has gained some sort of motivation from.
Yeah, he's really stepped up the training there. So Yunus, if you are listening, congratulations, and on your performance on Saturday. So
yeah, I was listening to it on the radio, and it was actually because I was at my sister's boyfriend's football game. So she goes to school in San Diego, but the team was playing in upstate New York.
Okay.
So it was like an hour away, so my whole family went to watch him play, but it was on at midday, so it was on at the time. I was literally listening to the Spurs match while watching football and trying to navigate my parents talking for the first time in a year and a half. So that was very that was intense. But Champions League this week.
There was one game that was an absolute stormer, which was Barcelona, who usually provide quite one-sided matches. Was a very good game. That was excellent. That was 3-2 in the end, and actually contained some really, really great football. Which usually when these big teams meet each other, it's kind of a bit of a lot of the time it's a sort of a bit of a damp squib. But that was fantastic actually. There was some really, really good goals. I advise people to go and search out the highlights.
Yeah. Wasn't what's his face Zlatan in form?
No, he was injured. He didn't even play.
He didn't play, and PSG won 3-2.
3-2. They won 3-2.
Wow.
Neymar's goal, though they lost, it was excellent. Like it's really worth that man can control the football very, very well. And then I think the British teams. Arsenal put in a very good performance to win, and Liverpool were beaten actually by Basel from Switzerland, which was funny.
Ooh.
So
trouble at Anfield.
Big trouble at Anfield, I would say, because they've almost done a Tottenham in that they've sold like a very talismanic player and bought a load of not rubbish, but no, that's the wrong word. A bunch of players that don't quite fit into the way that they used to play. Maybe it'll change, but he's got a bit of work on his hands to get anywhere in the Champions League now, has Brendan Rodgers.
And to counter that point, Southampton, who Spurs play at the weekend, are looking very, very good. Have you seen them play at all?
Yeah, second in the table. They are excellent at the moment. They're actually one of the best teams to watch. Like I think in the Premiership at the moment, they are the best team to watch. Obviously, Chelsea are top, but Chelsea are, I don't know, they play that style of football that is almost unwatchable. Sort of, how can you put it, very heavy-handed, jackhammer football. And Southampton are really like, this new guy, Coman, who I don't have a clue who he was before he came to this thing, the new manager, he's brought in some players out of the Dutch league, which, as you've been in Holland, you must know, like, is a pretty good league, actually, like, as you know, overall.
It's a feeder league, yeah. It's a feeder league. Yeah.
But, I mean, it's as they go for, like, the minor leagues in Europe, it's pretty decent. And they're doing really well. Though a couple of...
you lost the... We'll come back in a moment.
That's that.
You back?
Yeah.
What were you saying?
Ward-Prowse was injured with a ruptured knee for 3 months, so it might affect them a bit. But good luck to them. They're doing well.
No, I like to see him. All right, Ben's back, so we can say goodbye. Thank you guys for another good week. We didn't have anything to talk about, and then we ended up talking about conspiracy theories and football. So always good. All right, boys. I will hopefully see you next week.
Absolutely.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Next week.
All right, next week. I'll see you later.
See you later, Ron. Take care.